James Bond has been a part of our popular culture since 1953. It began with the novels of Ian Fleming.
The reason they did Casino Royale all comes down to me.
Daniel Craig. He is the sixth man to become the legendary agent.
How are you going to make your Bond different?
Casino Royale was the first book that Ian Fleming wrote, and he wrote it in 1953. He was a confirmed bachelor, and he finally decided that he was going to marry his girlfriend. So the running up to getting married, he went off to Jamaica, and he sat down to write the definitive spy novel.
The book is very real. It's a much grittier kind of realistic portrait of Bond.
The 1963 film Dr. No is credited as the first James Bond movie. However, the character made his screen debut almost a decade earlier.
It was made into a television play. Because of that, the rights were tied up. People that had those rights made the film Casino Royale in 1967, which was a spoof. So the book was never really done properly.
We got into a lawsuit with Sony Pictures in 1997, and as part of the resolution of that lawsuit, we got a hold of the rights, and we could finally make Casino Royale the way it should be.
This is Bond at the beginning of his career, which automatically rules out Pierce Brosnan to play the part of 007.
It's supposed to be Bond when he just gets his 00 license, and Pierce is too old for that.
I heard talk a few years ago that maybe you were considering doing a Bond movie.
Well, you know, I gotta say, that was one that I was very interested in doing.
Well, wouldn't that be great? Can you imagine a Quentin Tarantino Bond movie?
I'm Winston Wolfe. I solve problems.
The reason they did Casino Royale all comes down to me.
I actually wanted to do Casino Royale as a movie. He's like kind of a cold-blooded guy at the end of it. The last line of the book is he kills the woman he loves, and he calls up Control and says,
The bitch is dead.
The bitch is dead. And that's the last line of the book. I would actually like to do it in the 60s. I would take place in 1964, and it would have narration. I would want it to be like the book.
And then the thing about it is, I made it a point that I said I wanted to do Casino Royale. They were already on record as saying that the movie was unfilmable. But then after I said it and talked about it for a little bit, then the big thing on all the internets was that was what the fans wanted to see. And so that's when they, oh, maybe it's not so unfilmable now.
Well, I told them to hire Daniel Craig.
Actually, if I would have done it, though, I wouldn't have done it with Daniel Craig. I would have done it with Pierce Brosnan.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
I disagree.
Well, you're wrong twice tonight.
Quentin, he was after Kill Bill 2.
You and I have unfinished business.
He wanted to meet me. I got there at 7 o'clock. I waited, it was 7:30. Where the heck is he? Eventually he came down and he started ordering apple martinis. Well, we were fairly snockered. I was fairly snockered. He did. He was pounding the table, saying, "You are the best James Bond. I want to do James Bond with you." And it's very close quarters in the restaurant. I said, "Quentin, please, calm down." But you don't tell Quentin Tarantino to calm down. I wanted to do James Bond, but it wasn't meant to be. No Quentin Tarantino for James Bond.
Director Martin Campbell, who was responsible for launching Pierce Brosnan in GoldenEye, will return to direct the film.
My name's Martin Campbell.
Do you say that Casino Royale is the most important feature film of your career? Because I feel like GoldenEye was a tall order, but that was almost more to reestablish Bond's commercial viability. This is nothing less than a complete reboot, which is an even taller order. So would you say this is...
I think in the sense that if I failed, then it's a big risk, you know.
Yeah.
And the question was to hopefully, tonally, to get the movie so that it's very different, but it doesn't throw out all the, it keeps what's great about Bond, I think. That was the idea.
From the moment we decided we were going to make Casino Royale, obviously the biggest challenge was trying to find an actor who could play James Bond at the beginning of his career as a 00.
And one of the very first names that came up in discussion was Daniel Craig.
I always felt like whenever he was on the screen, you couldn't watch anyone else. So it was clear that he's a movie star.
I had a career, and I had a really successful career, more successful than I ever thought I would be as an actor. But I didn't have a cool persona. I don't do many suave and sophisticated roles. I hadn't done any. And I didn't really want to do it because I thought I wouldn't know what to do with it.
The character that Ian Fleming created is a very complex character and has been played obviously by many actors, and each one of those actors has sort of focused on different elements. And for this particular one, we thought Daniel was the right guy.
By September 2005, the producers finally had a script that they felt truly represented the book.
The script was very exciting to read. I saw potential that I hadn't thought of before.
Barbara Broccoli, she always said to me that she wanted me to do it. And I said to her from the very beginning, I said, look, if you allow me to get involved with this, if you allow me to get involved with every process that's going on, then I can walk onto that set and pretend to be James Bond.
Daniel was now odds-on favorite to take the part, but the producers had still to convince the studio. In September 2005, Daniel, along with 4 other actors, was invited to film a screen test.
We only wanted him. We were just determined to have him.
Action.
And the money.
Every penny of it. It became, from that point onwards, there was no turning back.
The way you went into physical training for it, I've never seen any actor do anything like that. And he trained like an Olympic athlete.
I wanted him to look like he was capable of doing what he was doing.
And I watched every single movie. I watched all of them sort of 2-3 times. Dr. No from Russia with Love are 2 of my favorite movies. Because the style, because the fact that they were filmed beautifully, the fact that in From Russia with Love you have Robert Shaw is probably one of the best villains that ever was.
God, it was great.
And, you know, they're still as exciting now to watch as they ever were. And I think way ahead of their time.
When I became an actor, I never fantasized about playing James Bond. As a kid, yeah, but that was fantasy.
After a 2-year worldwide search and months of speculation, on the 14th of October 2005, the James Bond film producers, Eon Productions, finally announced to the world's media the 6th actor to take over the role of Secret Agent 007.
New James Bond has finally been unmasked, and his name is Craig, Daniel Craig. But after 4 decades of tall, dark and handsome, are we really ready for the first blonde Bond?
He is extraordinarily different from what we've had before. He's got a few more lines around the face. Does look a little bit moodier, and frankly, in the press conference, he wasn't really that forthcoming.
That the new Bond, Daniel Craig, lacks the charm and the charisma needed by 007. I must admit, he doesn't exactly look the part.
And how are you going to make your Bond different?
As usual, Bond was never far from the headlines, and the tabloids were not going to give the new boy an easy ride.
When the onslaught of press against him happened on Casino Royale, it was brutal. And it was because of what? Blonde Bond? They hadn't seen him in the role. I remember we were in the Bahamas and he was on that crane sequence and he was killing himself on that crane sequence. And people were manufacturing this stuff based on a couple of teenagers who had started an internet thing called Craig Not Bond. But all these news agencies were treating it as if it was real news.
There's nothing I can do. It'll come from, I was wearing the wrong coloured laces probably.
Someone said, you might want to go online. I did, I went online. I went and stayed up all night and read everything, because that's what happens if you do that. It was tough. It was hate-filled. I woke up the following morning and I went, fuck it. I know the film's going to be good.
But we were angry for him because it was so unfair.
Everybody else was in a state about it. Everybody else was in this, God, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It must be awful. And I was like, it's fine. It's all good. Come on, let's crack on with it. Because I knew we were doing something really special.
Also, I remember one guy was buried himself in the sand sort of the night before we were going to be on the beach. And I remember Daniel coming out of the water, the whole crew going, oh my God. And that was probably the only time when a pap shot, because it was a pap shot that broke, suddenly everybody went, oh my God, this is the guy, the blonde guy. Who cares? The whole thing changed. And then it was a whole different thing. Then he was suddenly the coolest guy on earth.
Tell me a little bit about this story for those who are not familiar with Casino Royale.
There's an organization that uses terrorism to try and destabilize the world, to sort of, we're not sure why. It's not politically or religious based. It's obviously a group of people, whoever, who are trying to just use money to destabilize it. And their cipher is a man called reshaped,
right,
who is using the money on the stock market to ruin companies and make more money and cause mayhem. He happens to be a gambler and loses some money down to me. And
like £1 million, was it? Or?
No, I think it's a little more than that. It's
150
million pounds, right. Which he then has to go and win back. So he's set up a poker game in Montenegro.
But it's Treasury official Vesper Lind whose relationship with Bond sets her apart from Fleming's other female creations.
Why do you think Bond has that sort of emotional armor on, and what is it about Vesper that strips it from him?
In Bond's history, of course, he loses his parents. For someone who's been totally emotionally closed down, once he meets Vesper, he falls in love with her. And suddenly, of course, everything that's been closed down emotionally suddenly becomes accessible again.
Vespa is a kind of enigma. She is quite complex and it's difficult to see through her. They're very, very similar. They have the same same personality, both quite proud and dignified and very strong and tough. They have exactly the same sense of humor and they gradually, fall in love with one another. Why, I don't know, but it's something magical. It's just the chemistry.
She is the woman that, places the biggest mark upon Bond for his whole life.
And how the hell did you find out where I lived?
Same way I found out your name.
Judi Dench's M is the only one of the regular MI6 characters to return in Casino Royale, a role which began 11 years ago in GoldenEye.
There's no way you could not cast her in the part again, no matter how screwed up the timeline is. It's just M and there is nobody else.
I think the fact that M is Judi and therefore female is an incredibly important part of what Bond now is.
Well, she's the balance. And I'm so grateful that the fact that she decided she wanted to continue doing M, because it allows him to sort of be a chauvinist still, to have this attitude towards, any relationship, but particularly towards women. And she's kind of mum, I mean, he's the one that kind of cares for him most. And
but you also say that when you do a scene with her, she just draws you in because of the eyes.
I can't explain it to you. She's got pools for eyes, and you find yourself look almost like with a hook in your mouth being dragged towards it. I'm sure it's a ploy.
Yeah.
We're shooting now the card games, and I have to say it's a proverbial nightmare, that. It's because it's poker, and there are 10 people around a table, and they've all got hands, and they're all playing cards, and it's very difficult.
When you film one person, you've got to film the other person. It's got to look like they're both looking at each other. And invariably, at some point, somebody will look at each other, and it won't look like they're looking at each other. Now, add to that the fact is they've got cards in front of them and a pile of chips, which every time you cut to them on a continuity level has to be accurate. Well, you're supposed to enter so the others can see you.
Was I? Forgive me.
Even though we knew that it wasn't our money and we know that it's, we're filming a card game, when you're pushing sort of 50 million into the middle of the table, it didn't matter. It didn't matter that we knew that he was going to lose or I was going to lose.
And I can see on Daniel's face when he loses. He doesn't like it.
Good fun.
Dan, you look a mess. Explain yourself, man.
No, it's just a tough night, that's all.
The first action sequence of the movie features French athlete Sébastien Foucault, who co-founded the sport of parkour, or free running.
Street art, I think, as well as a sport. It's an art form, and Sébastien's particularly good at it.
So all they need to do now is put it on film, 200 feet up.
You clearly do a lot of your own stunts, don't you?
Why
did you choose to do that?
If I see, an actor involved and at a certain point within the stunt go, oh my God, that's him, he's there, then I continue engaging in the story. So it's not madness, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's painful fun, but it's fun. But, the stuff I can't do, I'm not saying I did every stunt in the movie.
Bond's car of choice is the Aston Martin. And as usual, the stunt boys are determined to give it a thorough road test, this time by rolling it as many times as they can.
So, let's do any final checks, guys, and get ready to shoot. And action!
It's a fairly violent sort of ride. You do get thrown around a fair bit inside, and it's just a case of really holding on, and as the car's going over, you're anticipating the impacts.
And cut it!
Car rolled a staggering 7 times. The stunt team think they may have a world record.
Our programme on TV went for the world record and they got 5. Now we beat that by 2, so we're sort of checking to see if that's the official world record now.
Also, he gets bloodied here. Rarely does Bond get. He gets beaten, but not bloodied.
He gets beaten, and certainly, at one sequence he's tortured, and he genuinely thinks at that point it's all over. He thinks that that's the end. But I like the fact that hopefully that we see someone who knows it's the end but won't give up. And that's, I think, one of the things that defines him.
He will not give up.
Will never give up, no.
I've got a little itch down there. Would you mind?
One question I've always had about Bond was, is he a killer who was groomed to be a gentleman, or was he a gentleman that was cultivated to be a killer? Because I feel like there are two types of screen Bonds. You have your Frank Sinatra Bond, which would be Daniel and Connery, and then you have your Dean Martin Bond, which is Pierce and Roger Moore.
I think Fleming envisaged the Daniel Craig Bond, is what I feel. That was his original. I mean, you know, it's interesting, in the books there's no humour. Also, he's a much darker character. The violence affects him, you know, even though he won't admit it, and he said he won't admit it to the girl. You know, he brushes it aside, but the truth is it does affect him.
As the production marched on, it became clear, to the crew at least, that Daniel Craig was the right choice. What the rest of the world thinks is now out of his hands.
The thing that Daniel brought to the character in the series was Bond's inner life and the complexity of the emotional life, which was in the books, but never really translated onto the screen.
Saying that fucking line, the weight of it. I don't know how many takes we did at the end of Casino Royale, but literally there are takes with, the name's Bond, James Bond. It's like I'm a 13-year-old whose voice is breaking. The name's Bond, James Bond.
Daniel Craig. Craig proved all his doubters wrong with his debut in Casino Royale.
The most successful yet.
The highest-grossing Bond movie in history. Box office hit Casino Royale becomes the first ever in the series to be shown in China's cinemas.
It just went skyrocketed. The movie went crazy. And the reviews were crazy, right?
The reviews were great, and the numbers were great.
Tell me what this means when you do this. When you say, okay, I'm going to be James Bond. What does it mean?
He's one of the biggest icons in cinema, and just the challenge, really just the challenge to say, come on, let's have a go at this, see what we can do with it.
It may be the best franchise in movie history.
I like to think so.
You committed to do two more of these?
2 or 3 more.
2 or 3 more?
Yeah. I don't know what the details are at the moment.
It's great to have you on this program.
It's been a pleasure.
Actually, if I would have done it, though, I wouldn't have done it with Daniel Craig. I would have done it with Pierce Brosnan.
Well, that's what you want.
I disagree.
Well, you won twice tonight.